It's not on. I'll start over again, in case nobody heard that. I'd like to call to order the Sunshine Coast Regional District Committee of the Whole meeting at 9:30 on July 27th, 2023, and acknowledge that the Sunshine Coast Regional District is within the territories of the Seychelles and the Squamish Nations. And first we need to adopt the agenda. There's an amended agenda in front of us. Yeah, there's no amendments to the agenda though, right? Are there? No further amendments. Okay. Is there a motion? Moved by Director Gavia, second by Director McMahon. All those in favor? The motion carries. And we have a delegation from Chris Sainsbury, Global Infrastructure Advisory Planner at KPMG, regarding the development approvals process that KPMG has been working on for the SCRD. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, there you go. Hello? Okay. Okay, good morning everyone, and thanks very much for inviting me today to this session. I'm really pleased to be here. We okay? Oh, sorry. There we go. Yeah. And I'll just share the screen while I'm at it. Okay, there we go. Okay, good morning, everyone. Thanks very much for having me here today. I believe I probably met you all, most of you virtually, probably 2 months ago, where I gave an interim briefing around the work we've been doing around the development approvals process review. Since then, we've gone on to complete our report, which is now with staff, and today I'm going to present some of the findings and recommendations going forward. So I've got a couple slides. I don't want to go through them in detail. Just to start with, I'll just give a little bit of a recap of what we set out to do originally. Apologies, I'm not sure what's happened to the fonts, but I'll speak over it anyway. About 6 months ago in January, we were engaged to conduct a review of the development approvals processes. We then went away, and these processes are obviously very critical to development. As you're probably aware, there's a lot of housing challenges, not just in the Sunshine Coast, but right across British Columbia. This is a problem that most, if not all, local governments are facing to different degrees. So over the last couple of months, we've been looking into the current state and kind of identifying how things could be improved here. I think the last time I spoke to you 2 months ago, we went through some of the observations and just kind of recap kind of how broad our research and interviews and evidence base covered. We had a whole bunch of interviews with staff. I think we consulted with 25 staff. We had interviews with industry representatives, applicants. Some were chosen randomly, some were kind of pointed towards us. We had meetings with local, the advisory planning commissions. We also had a lot of internal workshops with administration. And we went through a whole bunch of documentation. So it was quite a broad review. It wasn't just internal facing. We wanted to hear what's happening on the outside. So that was very important. Just to give a little bit more context about kind of me and my team, we have been doing very similar work with 10 other local governments in British Columbia, facing similar challenges to different degrees and kind of in different areas. So the first thing I want to say is, the Sunshine Coast is definitely not alone in this matter. It's a challenge right across the province. Just in terms of some of the findings we found, and I believe I presented most of these to you probably 2 months ago. The way we do our assessment, we don't just look at the process. People think, yes, this is all about a process and you can improve the process, but actually it's much broader than that. There's a big people element, there's an organizational governance element, there's a technology element, and then legislation and policy supporting that as well. So we take a very kind of structured approach to the way we review things. In terms of some of the key findings coming out of that, I mean, the first thing I'll start off with some real positives actually. Amongst all the the local governments I've been working with, there's a real desire to actually improve things here. Staff have been really keen. I know in some areas staff are stretched and constrained, but there's a real desire to improve, and I just wanted to point that out because it's something that really jumped out, and it's been a real pleasure working with the staff here. Some of the challenges that I found, there's a lack of documentation in a lot of areas in terms of what the process looks like, how they should be treated, and this sometimes results in kind of inconsistent processes, if you like, or lack of clarity around roles and responsibilities. On the technology side, there was a technology platform introduced quite a long time ago, which no longer really aligns with business needs and the actual process itself. And there's actually a whole bunch of different technologies that different teams are using. There's not much consistency across staff and across different departments, which has led to kind of communication problems and document storage problems and things like that. On the legislation and policy side, the policy framework is becoming quite outdated, and this is very similar elsewhere, and the reason often being that there's so much development activity, people are just almost firefighting, trying to respond to applications, spending a lot of time on that and not actually kind of getting ahead of things. That said, I know there's a strong plan, and one of the big initiatives going ahead for next year is the OCP renewal, so that's great to see. On the organization, people, and culture side, I think it's just communication challenges and across different departments, and maybe a lack of understanding. And one of the things we typically find is a lack of understanding of the whole process. So people know what they do, but they don't fully understand kind of the interdependencies, and improving that can definitely improve things. Another thing we found is there's not much tracking of information. So tracking of the status of an application. If you don't really track and keep record of things, it's hard to follow up, but also kind of have meaningful information and data to improve yourself. And then the last thing we looked at kind of was the experience side, both internal and external. It's been a difficult couple years with the pandemic, obviously, and kind of adapting around that and staff capacity. So that's another area we've been looking at. Sometimes there's frustration, but this is not uncommon across different local governments. So those are kind of the high-level findings. I think more importantly, rather than dwelling on that, is maybe just to focus a little bit more on kind of the way forward and the recommendations we put out. So the way we did this, we came up with all the findings, and then initially we came up with a long list of potential opportunities, probably I think 35 to 40 in total. Just recognizing that what we want to leave you with and staff with is something that's practical and implementable. I could tell you everything you could do to become perfect, but you spend years doing that, so that wouldn't be realistic. So what we wanted to do is distill it down to sort of a practical number of activities in a practical time frame so that you can maintain momentum and actually kind of make tangible improvements going forward. So we came up with 10 consolidated recommendations, under which there's a bunch of different actions and activities and almost sub-recommendations, if you like. I'm not sure if everyone's read the report that's been out. I believe it's been circulated. So in the report, we definitely have a lot more information, kind of diving much deeper into the recommendations, the rationale for them, and also kind of the benefits coming out, the resources that might be required to deliver upon them, and then suggested kind of phasing and scheduling of when you might want to do those. Just to kind of quickly run through what those recommendations are at a high level. So the first thing, which is really important actually, is to actually establish a process improvement champion, or I guess whatever you want to call it, a project lead, to actually lead the implementation of these recommendations. This is really important because what I see happen very often is we leave a bunch of recommendations, it's assigned to somebody who's already busy with the day job, it gets put on the side of the desk, and nothing really kind of moves forward. I really encourage to look at assigning somebody. It could be somebody, I think we specify some ideas in the report, but it could be somebody, half-time actually dedicated to driving these forwards. That is actually really important. And establishing not just a champion, but kind of a working group to go around, so there's some shared accountability. And I think now is a great time to start looking into that. There's been great momentum, great positive energy in terms of wanting to drive change. So I encourage you not to kind of and staff not to leave things too long while this momentum is there. The second thing that became quite apparent is, I think, documentation of processes, and particularly the development of what we call process maps, if you like. So these are kind of step-by-step process maps that show all the activities that need to be done, the interaction between different departments. it sounds very mundane, but actually what we found is actually the process of getting everybody, different teams around the table, hearing and listening to each other and understanding how they touch the process, how they interact, the dependencies, where the bottlenecks are. You'll often find the duplication of activities and inefficiencies. So actually process mapping is a really important thing, and there's been a strong desire to do that. And with process mapping, then you can better assign roles and responsibilities so that everybody's clear on their role. Because what we did find is across departments, sometimes there's kind of misaligned expectations, or both sides doing the work and duplication of effort. So there's a great opportunity there, and I think that's some low-hanging fruit that can be addressed pretty soon. Another thing we found is the communication could be improved, and the transfer of information between teams. What we found is, for some reasons, probably legacy reasons, different departments are using slightly different technology tools. There's a number of different systems within the Sunshine Coast. So a bit of rationalizing, a bit of consistency, better communication process protocols, better agreement of different approaches to communication will then drive better communication across teams. And I can't stress enough, actually, one of the biggest problems with processing applications is that each application can typically touch many different teams. And often what we see is one team will hand it over to the fence to another team, but there's kind of that lack of overall integration, coordination, and management. So I think that improved communication and collaboration will be really key going forward. So that's about internal communication. Then there's also external information and communication, and even education. Because of the Sunshine Coast is a regional district, it's slightly different to local government. There's dependencies on provincial agencies. Even those roles are not perfectly clear. In fact, when we talked to a lot of applicants, they weren't even aware that the Ministry of Transportation is involved in certain things, and different ministries have different involvements. And I think it's quite important to almost educate. This is something the ministries also need to work on themselves, but I think it's something that can improve and also manage expectations better, so that people don't think they're submitting applications to the Sunshine Coast and it's all within your ball court, because actually you're working with a lot of other external agencies and First Nations, of course. The next point is kind of building a stronger compliance culture. So what we mean by that is, I think the way the Sunshine Coast has evolved over the years, it's been a very friendly kind of collaborative, collegial, I guess, area to do development. But I think as you're kind of growing, there's more development. There's a need to be a bit more structured and have a stronger stance. And what I mean by that is, actually the single biggest problem that delays applications and causes the biggest grief is incomplete applications when they're taken in, or poor quality applications. It sounds very obvious, but this is the number one problem. So the more you can do upfront to stop that, or to improve that, the better likelihood that the processing of applications is going to be much quicker. And one of the things we typically see is when you receive an application, because effectively that's when the stop clock starts for an application, if something is incomplete, that you need to kind of develop a culture where you start turning people away. And I know it may be hard at first, but it will then drive kind of a culture within the community to come back with better applications. And the reason this is really important is it then it changes the culture, but it means you're only accepting applications in that can actually be processed, which has all the information you need. This is actually something we've been working with, implementing with other local governments. And we've actually managed to reduce some of the processing times by 50–60% just by being much stricter on compliance at application intake. The next thing, number 6, I want to kind of highlight is application ownership. So I mentioned before, applications typically touch many different parts of the organization, but what happens is things almost get thrown across the fence, or they get sent to a different department. Everybody's got almost competing priorities. They have the day job, they're processing applications as well, but it may not be top of priority. So having somebody that owns it from start to finish, that is almost like project managing it, to check up on the status, check where we are, follow up, chase people up, that is something we've seen to be very effective to actually push things along. The next one, number 7, is kind of enhancing collaboration with the nations. one thing I would say, there's been a strong desire from both the First Nations. So we had quite a few conversations with the Sechelt First Nation, but there's a strong desire with staff also to kind of be more collaborative and work more closely around it. Because a lot of development does happen on their land. They want to be heard, and I think there's a strong desire to collaborate. I think there's areas that can be improved. There's been discussions and talks about improving capacity with some of the nations, better communication, sharing of information, and focusing on what's important to them and what's important and to the regional district, and really focusing on that, being a bit more targeted. Number 8 is around the use of technology. So that, like I mentioned, the system was, the main permitting system, Tempest, was implemented quite a long time ago. At the time, it might have been fit for purpose. I think over the years, it's been neglected a little bit. I think a lot of what I would call super users or champions or experts in using the software have kind of moved on. And so it hasn't really moved with the times. I think another thing we found, there was a bit of a misconception around some of the capabilities of the software or some of the restrictions, but upon a further investigation, speaking to other users of the same technology, we did a bit of a benchmarking exercise. We found that it has a lot more capabilities than it was led to believe by staff at the regional district. So what I would suggest is, once the process is kind of more clearly documented and understood, then kind of almost realigning or rebuilding some of the process workflows within the technology would definitely help the technology become much more an enabler to support the process. The number 9 is about kind of improving the policy frameworks. One thing we've noticed is the planning team at the moment was largely one team. What we sometimes see elsewhere is you have a current planning team who kind of focuses more on the approval and processing of applications, and then you have a long-term planning team looking at renewing policies, OCP renewals, things like that. I know there's a plan to work on the OCP, and I think there's also a plan to actually have a slightly different structure, have some dedicated people focusing on the long term, so that you're not always just firefighting in the short term. And then the last one, number 10, is supplementing some in-house resources with in some specific areas. So what we found is there's a couple bottlenecks or couple lack of bottlenecks due to capacity and certain people with certain specialties. So there's 1 or 2 areas you may want to consider that could actually help the process add a little bit more capacity, because at the end of the day, you're only as strong as your weakest link in the overall process. So I've run through it at a very high level, and there's a lot more detail in the report, and there's a lot more kind of sub-actions, but I thought maybe I'll just pause there before I move to my final slide, if there's any questions at this point. Otherwise, happy to run through the final slides and take questions after, if that's the preference.
Questions? We'll wait for your final
Okay,
slide.
I'll go through my final slide, yeah. Okay.
There's a question. Yeah.
Thank you. You mentioned there's a couple of bottlenecks. You were looking for suggestion that maybe that be accommodated. Can you just clarify what the bottlenecks were?
So we didn't do a full staffing assessment across the regional district. That would have been a very detailed assessment of everything everyone does. But what we did find is, and we did hear a lot through the interviews, is in certain departments people are short-staffed. So we highlighted some of those departments in our report. What I would suggest is, before kind of looking at additional resources, is probably taking a look at the process again in more detail. And when I talk about, if you look at our implementation plan, it starts by firstly understanding the roles and clarifying that to make sure there's no duplication and kind of wasted effort, and then actually get people around looking at the whole process. Then I think there'll be a better understanding of where the real bottlenecks are, and if that's really the case. Everywhere we go, people say we need more staff, and I don't disagree. There's a lot of development activity, but I think it would be more prudent to look at the process in a little bit more detail, map it out, and then take a look at some of the staffing issue. And there are some specialist areas which we think could help as well. So.
Thank you. Director Lee.
Thank you, Chair. My question, I think, was mostly answered. Typically you do an as-is process flow and then a to-be process flow, and then quite often there's possible productivity gains when you do that, which might mean you don't have to hire more people.
Yeah.
So I think you were describing that as the process. I just wanted to check
Yeah,
in.
exactly. You want me to talk a little bit more about where we've done that and what can come out of it?
Yeah, if you could do it,
Yeah.
like what you
So-
might expect from it. Yes.
Yeah, so we've done this with quite a number of other local governments. We call it maybe lean or Six Sigma process improvement is a technical word for it. But it's like you say, you map the current as is, you get people to understand it, and I think even just in mapping it as is, there'll be a lot of questions, if you get a lot of people around the room, why do we do this? How can we improve things? And then the next step is we typically do a future state on how can we drive efficiencies, how can we reduce redundancy, speed things up, maybe delegate things more. There's different ways you can do it, and then that's a kind of a future state. So in that alone, there's multiple benefits on staff resourcing, on timelines, on the way you structure things within the process, and how you can kind of reallocate even resources earlier upfront to get better quality applications, and then it will require kind of less resources downstream when you actually review them. So we found this to be incredibly successful when you kind of dive really deep in. It is quite a detailed exercise, if you like, but I think it's a better approach to do that first than kind of just jump to adding additional resources straight away.
Thank you, Chair.
Director Bax?
Well, I know you've answered most of my questions as well. I know that we did recently raise the fees in this department. I was wondering if we could get an answer from staff at how close this process is to being self-sustaining financially, or are the taxpayers subsidizing this? And
There is a staff report following this. so
okay, very
maybe
good.
we should-
And I was
we should
wondering if
save the
Mr.
questions for staff until we
okay.
get that.
And how long can Mr. Sainsbury stay on and help guide the staff?
That might be a staff question, too. I don't know.
Shall I leave that for staff for later?
Yeah, we'll wait until the staff
Okay.
report. Yeah.
Yeah. I was aware of the review. I'll let them answer that later. Yeah.
Director Lee?
Thank you, Chair. I actually had one more question. I hope this is the time for. You mentioned that the number one problem was the quality of incoming applications. And yet I've heard from our experienced people saying that the application process slows me down because I already know what I'm doing. Are these things opposed, or are they both true?
I think there's a number of angles to it. I think because things aren't necessarily documented internally, maybe they aren't always treated consistently, and there's been a lot of staff turnover as well is another challenge. So getting everybody to kind of act and give the same answers every time, that's one challenge. In terms of experienced applicants, sometimes I actually find they're the worst culprits. They're very confident, and because they think they know the system and what's important, sometimes they don't submit everything they need, or they think they can submit it later. For example, they probably ask, "Why do you need this now? We'll deliver it later." I've seen problems with the most experienced applicants elsewhere. So I don't think it's necessarily fair. There's two kind of sides to the story there.
Okay, proceed.
Okay. I'll just
I
finish,
don't think we
wrap up
have
my
any more.
last slide, which was around kind of the way forward. If I can share the screen. Okay, so in our report, we outlined those 10 overarching recommendations, and there's more details beyond that. But I think what's more important is to actually figure out a plan going forward. So in our report, we put together a proposed implementation roadmap, and we came up with a 2-year roadmap for a number of reasons. One, there's a lot to be done, and I think we need to be realistic. People are already busy. There's already staffing constraints. But two, I think you don't want to leave it too long, sort of becoming 3 or 4 years, because there's a level of momentum and excitement and expectation from yourselves and the community as well. So typically we find a 2-year implementation plan is realistic. And the way we've kind of structured it is to firstly get there's some low-hanging fruit, and there's some kind of foundational elements that would help you, such as the process mapping, so you build a strong foundation, and then later, as you get that, then you can slowly refine and continually improve. And so we came up with a Gantt chart, or a schedule, if you like, that shows our proposed recommendation for how that should roll out. But at the end of the day, it's obviously up to administration and the board to decide what to go forward. In terms of delivering upon all the recommendations, I do believe the Sunshine Coast would benefit from delivering upon all of them. It is a recommendation. Some of them are a little bit interconnected, so I'd just be a little bit cautious if there wasn't an appetite to do everything. And the other thing I would just say around kind of implementation is it's going to take effort. It's going to take resources. Do not underestimate this, and this is not something that can be done off the side of the desk. If there's a real desire to make improvements, it needs to be kind of recognized and treated as a project, and having dedicated resources to manage it and actually drive it forward. That's another thing I would mention. And there's going to be an element of change management and communication, new ways of working, going back to kind of the culture piece and having a stronger compliance stance. I know that may not have been kind of the way things were done in the past, but I think there's going to be an element of kind of moving forward that people need to be bought into this and brought along the journey. And so far, all the staff are very bought into, as we went through the workshops, and we validated a lot of suggestions. So I'll probably leave it there, but happy to answer any more remaining questions you might have.
Director McMahon.
Sure, I have lots of questions, but in my extremely limited experience with planning, I noticed there's really two kinds of customers. There's like the professional customers, the developers, and then there's the do-it-yourself homeowners who are trying to navigate the system. Do you find that these two groups have different needs and need to be handled differently?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And what we see in some of the larger cities is almost like a two-tier service, if you like, almost like a concierge service where there's a lot more hand-holding for the kind of the first-timers, and then less for the professionals. I think given the size and the nature of the Sunshine Coast, I don't think there's necessarily a need to structure it that way at the moment. I think there's a need to definitely have better documentation, better communication of requirements, and treating everybody the same. At the moment, we find things a little bit loose, if you like, and that can lead to misunderstanding, lack of clarity, and people abusing the system, and that includes the developers. The more kind of robust a process or a framework you can start to begin to instill, it will drive a change in the community, and we've seen that elsewhere.
Director Inkster.
So as part of the end of the presentation, Chris indicated that there would be a 2-year proposed implementation process. However, throughout the presentation, there was an allusion to and/or a direct pointing at the fact that we've had staff ups and downs. So I would ask through you, and I'm wondering if it should come up in the subsequent discussion, whether we have and the ability to do this within 2 years, or whether there's a different different timeline that we would have to meet to implement some of these recommendations.
I think that's primarily a question for staff, but if you have any insights you'd like to contribute. Go
yeah,
ahead.
what I would say is maybe 2 years is too ambitious. What I would say is just get started. We've kind of structured it into, I think, 2 or 3 phases. I would start doing the foundational things, and then maybe regroup, reassess where you are. Maybe the priorities might have changed slightly, and then you can kind of revisit that. But what I caution against is seeing this as too overwhelming and just leaving it for 6 months. Then it will just kind of go by the wayside. But I fully take your point. 2 years is still fairly aggressive, if I'm honest. Staff are already busy, and it's not because there's not been, necessary lack of budget for staff. There's been, challenges recruiting, getting people over here. There's a myriad of reasons for some of the staffing challenges.
Director McMahon.
Yes, on the page of your report dealing with First Nations, which is page 55 in our agenda, there are a number of mentions of the Sechelt Nation and no mentions of the Squamish Nation. So I was just wondering why that was, whether they were part of the process too.
So when we first started out, we wanted to engage, speak to both of them. I believe we reached out to the Squamish Nation but didn't get a response, whereas the Sechelt Nation, I know they've been more actively engaged over the past, or more interested in kind of collaborating and working more closely with the SCID. And because of that, most of the engagement has been with the Sechelt, and there's a strong desire to work more closely. And they were very appreciative of the fact that this project is ongoing, and that they were included as part of this project.
Okay, page 58, there is a mention of explore pooling resources with other regional districts to acquire strategic resources that can be shared across participating governments. That one caught my attention. I was wondering if there is an advocacy role or a UBCM role in this, or would there be a role potentially for the BC Social Procurement Initiative? Like, how could we go forward with this?
So this came about by the fact that, and not just, and speaking with others, a lot of people facing the same challenges. There's actually limited skill set or capability in the workforce in the market. Everybody is short of planners and specialized resources, like RP bios and archaeologists and things. So there is a shortage. So one of the things we've heard from other local governments is, could we share, or I don't know, collaborate more to kind of share resources to go around. So that's something other regional districts have raised, and so I thought it's worth something exploring here. Ideally, I mean, if you could get all the staff you needed for yourself, that would be the ideal state, but it's a challenging market, and that hence why we put that out. To your other point around, should this be something maybe the province or UBCM steps in, these are conversations I'm actually having separately with them. They're looking at ways they can further support local governments in the future. There was a first round of funding, which is kind of what funded this piece of work from UBCM on behalf of the province, and they're looking into what could then happen as kind of the next piece. They haven't quite landed on what that is. It may not be straight out grant funding like now, but it could be provision of more toolkits or shared staff, or more input and support from the province. So they are looking into that.
That would be great, by the way, and some structure to allow us to share staff, because that can be very challenging across regional districts. The homeowners who are the customers struggle with the language. I struggle with the language. I struggle to read our materials, our documentation, our website. Have you worked at all with clients to do a plain language take on some of the communication so that people can understand better?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. There's a huge educational communication piece that underlies this, both internally and externally, so everybody's on the same page. Some things we did find is, even with some of the the new bylaws, there wasn't even a full common understanding internally. So I think there is some work to be done to simplify it, or get everybody on the on a common page. I think revisiting some of the communication materials on the websites and what's shared, and simple tools, checklists, and what are they called? Frequently asked question guides can often go a long way. But I know something that people, particularly in this region, like is kind of a little that interaction and personal touch. So you don't want to go all the way to kind of provide that, I think, but you do need to find a kind of the right balance. What I do feel is, as you begin to document things internally more, there'll be a much stronger understanding, and I think you'll then be able to communicate and articulate much more clearly the requirements so that everybody is on the same page.
Thank you. And we do have our staff report on this process as well to look at next. So I trust you'll be hanging around for that. You can just stay here in case there's any additional information you need to provide in that context. Okay, thanks, Chris. I'll look to staff now for the staff report.
Thank you, Chair. Just before Senior Planner Scow speaks to the recommendations that staff are bringing to the committee, I just wanted to offer a couple of brief comments, and they will be brief as KPMG nicely spoke to the content of their final report, just to kind of land this project in our organizational context and fit it into the strategic conversations that staff have been bringing forward to the board about where our planning and development services are going. And staff's take on the report as a whole is that the findings showed that our processes, our policies, our bylaws related to development, if we think of them as assets, and we've talked about some of these things as kind of soft assets before, they serve the times that they were created in, but they've come to a point in their life cycle where a renewal is needed if we're going to meet today's needs. And we've heard clearly the need and the desire and the opportunity to make processes more effective, more efficient, more responsive to community needs. And in some cases, there's alignment between what we're being asked for from a bunch of different stakeholders. And those needs include things like action on housing, advancing climate resilience, and more legible and reliable services, which echoes some of the questions that directors had for the delegation. And staff's take is that the recommendations respond to organizational capacity, promote coordination, clarity, and efficient use of resources. And to a person, the staff that were involved in this project are excited about the opportunities and excited about the work ahead in this area. And with that, I'll ask you, Lee, as the project lead, to just quickly highlight the recommendations that staff are bringing forward today. Thank you.
So here are the highlights of the staff recommendation as presented in the staff report. First, endorse the DAPR final report to guide the implementation of the development approval process improvement. Second, amend the UBCM contract to make full use of the remaining funding for DAPR. And third, consider DAPR implementation in the 2024 budget process. Thank you.
I first have a procedural question here, looking at our corporate officer. Sorry. Sorry. Voting all directors, this is isn't this a rural planning? I think this is probably of concern to not only the town, but the SNGD and District of Sechelt.
I would say the voting should be all. Is it all on the agenda?
It does say all, yeah.
Yes. Yes, because the implications of some of the recommendations potentially go beyond that if we're looking at process change and process review. It involves legislative as well, which is general government.
Okay. Director McMahon, though we're not paying for, I mean, it's a grant anyway, right? I mean, it's just, but it's going to rural planning. Presumably, most of the grant would be in there. Yeah, but, okay, but we're just voting on kind of the UBCM aspects. I see. Okay, always complicated. Director McMahon.
Right. On page 11 of the staff report, I noticed the sentence, effecting the changes will require surge resources. Tell us more.
Thank you for the question. The first comment to say is staff haven't done a comprehensive analysis of what resourcing looks like. And resourcing decisions are typically made through the budget process, so hence the recommendation to refer it there. But whether we're talking about support from legislative services that's focused on planning and development, perhaps more than in any other year, or talking about redeploying current resources from within planning or building or bylaw enforcement to work on a process improvement committee, or talking about incremental resources is yet to be determined. But as the delegation noted, staff do assess that this level of change will take some unique resources, likely temporary. Thank you.
Director Gabius.
Thank you, Chair. I've had a few comments from my constituents in regards to the pre-application process that was implemented recently. And I'm wondering if staff could speak to is it efficient? Is it achieving what it was set out to achieve?
Thank you for the question as we shift through our two technology pieces here on the table. Yes, it is a new process. There are some recommendations in the full DAPA report as well that sort of speak to further implementing the pre-application process. So I would say staff have seen some improvements in terms of the quality of applications that have been coming in, but having worked in other municipalities and local governments, I would say there's still work to be done on that. So it is a process that is in flux and new and sort of being tested in the waters, but staff do believe that there is room for improvement there. Thank you.
Thank you. My Zoom's down here. Okay, so we have some recommendations before us. Director McMahon?
Yes, I'd like to move the recommendations on page 9.
Seconded by Director Bax. Any discussion of the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor? That motion carries. So I think we are through this item. Thank you very much for joining us and making your presentation. And we'll surely be in touch in the future still with this. Are we ready for the next piece here, which is a water supply update? We just had to switch around some chairs. So I'll look to staff for the water supply update, which is item 4 on the agenda. It's verbal.
Thank you, Chair. This is the water supply update for July 27th. I think all of us were very relieved to get some rain this last week. And the one thing that I was thinking about, I was sure glad it wasn't on the weekend, because could you imagine if you'd organized a wedding for months and you had 50 odd days of sun and then it rained on your wedding day? But it was Monday, which worked out well for everybody that was getting married this weekend. The first slide you've seen before, and I checked again this morning. I was wondering if the drought condition, they would change the drought conditions after our rainfall, and they haven't. The province hasn't. We're still on level 4, and obviously the rain didn't do enough for them to convince them to change the levels of drought in BC. I see the rain coming up north in the north east soon here, so hopefully they can reduce those levels. The next slide here, we're all aware of this, I believe. The climate's changing, and it's so indicative if you look at the volume of fires we've had over the last 4 or 5 years. Look at the last 6 columns. It's unbelievable compared to the previous 20 years. Of course, this is drought causing this effect. Unfortunately, we haven't had that impact here, and hopefully we don't. But this is just showing that the whole province is having a hard time. On July 27th, we implemented stage 3 at Eastbourne. Eastbourne's, pardon me? 21st. Sorry, 21st. We implemented stage 3. Eastbourne's a different system. It has wells that can drop quite rapidly, and then they stay down low for the summer, and that's how we implement our stages. The people on Eastbourne are great at conserving water. They have their own cisterns that they use on their property, and they're well aware of using small amounts of water. So, we want to thank the people in Eastbourne, which is on Keats Island, for all the conserving they do. But quite often we go to stage 4 in Eastbourne, so looking at the weather coming up, I'm sure that will happen to Eastbourne this summer. The South Pender water system is on stage 3, and it certainly has been identified that their water consumption this year compared to last year is considerably more. The one thing that really causes us to be concerned is we've exceeded our permit a number of times this year in that system, and we can't do that. That's part of the reason why we're going to stage 3, and staff are working with the residents and sending out letters notifying them of stage 3, and today staff were up in the area working with bylaw to talk to people that are have leaks on their systems, and we would appreciate it if they fixed them. So why is South Pender in stage 3? This is unique for South Pender. Again, it goes back to our first couple of slides. It's been really high temperatures this year. There wasn't much rainfall. And the rainfall that we just recently got gained probably about 2 centimeters in that lake. And it's currently down about 40 centimeters. So it's a really rain-dependent system with a reasonably small catchment area. So once we get into summertime, there's no snow in this catchment for early on in the season, and we need the rains. I wanted to describe so that you can all understand what we're talking about when we talk about Harris Lake, McNeil Lake, and the Madeira Park area. Up at the top left of the screen is Madeira Park. You can see down at the bottom left of the screen that this little hairpin in the road. When you're going up to Pender Harbor, you all probably know that's where the sign is that tells you how far to the ferry, that kind of a thing. To the right, there's a lake. To me, it looks like a little man with a special hairdo or something like that, but that's McNeil Lake. And then up at the top right, that one looks like a little head of an animal. That's Harris Lake. So when we're talking about Harris Lake feeding water to McNeil Lake, that's how far it has to go through all those bushes all the way down to McNeil Lake. So that gives you a perspective of how we're trying to, when we mention working with Harris Lake, that's what we're trying to do, is get water from that lake up at the right, top right, down to the one at the bottom left. So I touched on this already. We've exceeded the water license permitting volumes a number of times this year. That's laid out in our permit, and we have to notify the province every time we exceed the permit. And so far they're being good about it, but you're not supposed to continuously exceed your permit. We've started preparations for modifying the permit so that we can potentially take more out per day. The permit, we have a large volume of storage water available in those two lakes. We just can't take out a lot each day. And so we're trying to change that number so that we can take out more per day, but that won't be probably till next summer. And part of that will be considering the long-term impacts on the lake. This is the hydraulic cycle, but McNeil Lake doesn't have those tall mountains with the snow on it next to it. It's just explaining that we need the rainfall to fill up the lakes at the bottom, and evaporation and transpiration affect the lake during these hot times. And we're certainly noticing this year with both of the creeks that it seems like the ground around the lakes is drier. It's having an effect on the creek flows and the lake levels. Moving over to Chapman Water System, we're in stage 2. And again, we're using quite a bit of water. We're averaging about over 1,000 liters a day per residential water use. And at the bottom there, we're encouraging everybody to sign up for their monthly water use data update so that they can see their usage. Here's Chapman Lake. We really want to point out that in the past, there's been concerns about the calibration on our flow meters, but we've calibrated all of the flow meters this year out of the lake at our creek monitoring station, and they're accurate. We have accurate numbers to be able to efficiently manage the water in the systems. And Edwards Lake Station, each lake has a dam, each lake has a siphon, and each lake has communication that talks to us. And recently we put Edwards Lake Station online. That includes taking batteries up and doing our usual maintenance on the system. And each system is run by solar panels. And Edwards Lake actually has a micro hydro generator to run the power for the system. And so those are all up and running, and we can monitor each lake from afar. When I first planned this graph, it was going to basically show you there was no rain. But this last week there was, and that was really nice. But what rained on the one day there, on Monday, was equivalent to the rain that we've seen since June the 1st. And then the next day it was about another 7 mils. Watching I think it was CTV, it was actually quite interesting. They showed the rain that had come, and usually the rain misses our watershed, and it's like, darn. But this time there seemed to be a focus on the watershed. There was the purple blob right over our watershed. It was almost like we'd asked for it. It worked out quite well. So there was 40 on one day and 7 on the next day at Chapman Lake, which again was more than we'd received since June the 1st. This is one of my favorite graphs. It's quite interesting, and it's quite colorful as well. So this shows the lake level at Chapman Lake. So the red one is last year, and then the green one is 2021, and the red one is 2022. The red, pink, you can't really see, but it's pinkish. It's the one on the left, like a check mark. The other two are other years, 2019, 2020, and it's sort of hard to see because on the wall here, it takes out the one part of the graph. But the 2019 and 2020 is what we would have typically seen. You can sort of see they're just little check marks up at the top kind of a thing, where 2022 was much different, as was 2021. The concern this year specifically was that in 2021 we had an early spring, but then you can see, like in early September, we had a heavy rainfall, so it sort of took us out of the drought. Last year, we had a later start, but went extremely long. So concern this year is that we've started similar to 2021, but we don't want to end like 2022. If you look at the pink line from this year, you can see the rainfall, how it affected the lake. That's the little check mark at the end there. And then the curve on the line shows, again, it's challenging to see on this picture here, but it's more of a sweep down, not quite a steep decrease like other years. You can see the other years, they're very similar decrease as they're going down. And I think that might be related to the fact that we've put Grey Creek on earlier, and we're now using water from Church Road. So it slowed the drawdown of the lake, which is our goal. So it's nice to see the pink line go past the green line, because we were in our earliest drawdown of that lake that we've seen in the last 5 years. And now we've passed that green line, so we're sort of not as bad as 2021 now, kind of thing, right? I'll talk about it here, I believe, that, so the rains that came, as you can note on that graph there, they increased the level of the lake by 0.2 of a meter, 20 centimeters. So to put it into perspective, on July 19th, we were at minus 30 centimeters in the lake. By July 3rd, we were minus 50. We lost 20 centimeters in the lake in 4 days. Then by the 25th, we were back up to 30 again. So over a 6-day period, we were back to how we were 6 days earlier. And now the valves are open again, and now we're draining the lake down again. So I don't know exactly how much the rain saved us, but there's an example that it sort of put us back 6 days, if you want to say it that way. So here's another example of explaining what I just talked about in that graph. We've put this online. Anybody can see this. We're being very transparent about the lake levels. And you can see that the same sort of thing, that from July 24th, July 25th, we actually gained storage in Chapman Lake. And I have to say that's due to the fantastic water technicians that we have. They're up all night opening and closing these valves to try and keep water in the lakes. There was a question last meeting, and we were trying to explain it a little bit better here. This is what happened last week before the rains. This is the volume of water we were using from each source that we were using last week. And you can see the average flow per day is 18 million liters, or 18,000 cubic meters a day. You can see 60% of it is from Chapman, 19% is from Church, 18% is Grey Creek, and 4% is Chesterwell. We don't have Church Road at full capacity yet. We're still trying to work out the kinks. But I think this graph really shows the importance of Grey Creek, and then the ability to use it earlier. And that's, again, thanks to working with the local health officers and having their approval to use Grey Creek. I noted at the very bottom of this page, this would have been a fantastic example of why you put in a cistern. You might have used a lot of your water. It would have filled up, and now you have a full cistern. Along with, we're talking about staff collecting monthly meters, and we have had properties that have fixed their leaks, and again, they're large volumes. If you can imagine 70,000 liters per day leaking out of one water service. And that, again, is identified by meter reads, and that's why we're excited about getting meters on all of our water services. I will note again here, we did have one of our own leaks in North Pender that we fixed last Friday night, and it was identified at 2 o'clock. Crew went on site. A number of them had occasions that they had to cancel to stay there till midnight to fix it, dig up the water main and fix it, and it has been repaired. So that's the expected response for our staff, and when we identify a leak, that it's repaired immediately, whether it's in the middle of the night or in the middle of the day. The environmental flow needs for Chapman Creek, we have applied to reduce the environmental flow needs, and it's being reviewed right now. And we've been in communication with them this morning. They responded to us saying that it's under review. And that's to reduce the flow in the creek. 30, 40 liters a second, which is about 1/6, 1/7 of the water that we released down there, because we released 200. And we're hoping to have that response within the next couple days. And then prior to the rain, we're managing the creek. We're releasing 200 liters a second. That's why the lake is going down. And if we're able to release less, then of course it'll have an effect on the storage in Chapman Creek and extend the ability to release environmental flow needs and use for the general public. Just a short update on Langdale. Well, we're still working on this, and to get it up into the system, I think this is being discussed, but we're talking about potentially running this water all the way up the bypass. There'll be infrastructure at the top of the bypass, including a treatment plant, a reservoir, so it's a big project. So we're working with the contractors on preliminary design. Will Chapman water system go on stage 3 or 4 water restrictions? You can see the effects that one rainfall has on our reservoirs, our lakes, and staff meet weekly and talk about this every day. And then one note in there, we can't predict the weather, but if somebody could just get that rainfall again every 2 weeks, that would be really good. But if we hadn't had that rain, we would be going on to stage 3 very soon. Now with the rain, it's adjusted the lakes a little bit. I still think it's going to be very soon because it's 2 weeks of hot weather coming up again. So I can't, we monitor this every day, and I can't say right now when we're going to go to stage 3, but if we have sun through August, we will be going to stage 3. Now it's time for some questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Very excellent, informative report, and very well presented with the visuals too. I think I'm sure everyone appreciates that. Lots of questions. I have a big list of questions myself, but it doesn't look like we're ever going to get to me. So, Director Bax.
Thank you. I was wondering what steps we're taking to educate the public as to conservation ways to conserve water. Is it enough? I probably don't think so. I was wondering if there's more that we can do, because I look through media and I don't see anything. Unless people are going to our website and looking for conservation tips, I don't really see anything out in the wild. I just created a newsletter for my community, and I put a link to the BC government BC site with tips on how to conserve water. And I was wondering if there's more steps we can take to educate the public on this. Really, this is the only thing that's going to turn it around for us, is if people cut back on the use of water.
Yeah, I want to elaborate on that, because that's something that really stood out to me, the statement, now is the time to conserve water, which was, I was already thinking before that statement even appeared in the presentation. It's really clear. I mean, the people still using that usage statistic that was early on in the presentation. I don't think it's even a matter of tips to conserve water. It's just that with that statistic of over 1,000, people just aren't taking this seriously, like whether they have tips or not, and the communications aren't getting out that now is the time to conserve water, and people can be using a lot less than that. We know this, to even get through the summer. So definitely, I echo those concerns about communications and what can we all be doing. I don't think we are in a position that this is such a serious position for our community. I don't think we can sit back and say, well, we've got a communications department to deal with that. I think we all need to work on getting the word out there, and how can we do it? I think So what are we doing in terms of communications and how can we help? And I'm sure someone will answer. Okay.
I can speak to some of that. Thank you for the question. A lot of the conservation efforts that we're putting out, we are putting that out on social media. We have avenues through our website and online. We also do print publications in the Coast Reporter. I'm not sure if, Shane, you have anything to add to that. But
Oh, I would just add that, as I noted, everybody in South Pender Harbor received a letter from us asking them to conserve water, along with why we went to stage 3. And I started writing a list of what communications we do, and if there's any suggestions to improve our communications, please let us know. We're trying our best, and if there's something that we're missing, I'd appreciate if you let us know.
Okay, I'm going to jump in just following up on the South Pender Harbor piece too, because I appreciate how much time was spent on that in this, because it's a really concerning situation there. And I'm sure Director Lee will have something to say about that as well. At what point do we move on from saying we'd appreciate it if you'd fix your leaks to more serious messaging? Again, with communications, because it's a critical situation there. It's very concerning.
Thank you, Chair. We've recently sent out 3 shut-off notices to people, and miraculously the leaks got fixed. So we might be doing more of that.
Director Inkster.
Yeah, thank you. I think people are frustrated. That's why they're still using a lot of water. I think they still point the finger at the regional district saying, what are you doing? What have you been doing? That's just what I sometimes hear. And I'm not saying we're responsible. I'm just saying that's what's going on out there. And that's why some people are still using water. And if you talk to people in the community and or even on social media, you'll find out that that's why some are still doing what they're doing. A little bit of cognitive dissonance going on there. I had a couple of questions for wedding planner Walkie. I just wanted to ask, is it possible to add the graph from 2015 up there if there was data on the lake drawdown? That was a year of a large forest fire on the coast that could have potentially taken out West Seashelt. And it's an indication when there's fires of the low level of dryness and the low level of water probably subsequent to that. So that was just my first question. And my second question was, when there is rain, at what point do we see the last of that rain either filtrating and or moving into our water system? Does it take 24, 48, 72 hours? So the last indications and or improvements to our water system that we'll see from a rain event. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. And from experience, it does rain on weddings in June, so that's why I brought that up. It's interesting, I'm finding more that the more information I present, the more information that it feels that the board wants to see. And one slide I almost put in was how the rain affected Chapman Creek in this rainfall. And it's quite rapid. I call it a stiletto. It looks like a stiletto shoe. It just goes rapidly up and then slowly drifts down. And so on Monday, it went from something like 200 liters a second, which we were regulating, to about 1,100 liters a second. And then by yesterday, it had dropped right back down to about 400, and they had to open the valve again in anticipation. They have to think 12 hours ahead. What's going to happen in the creek 12 hours from now? And so they started opening the valve yesterday for anticipation that the creek would be back down to about 200 today. So there's an example of the rain that you saw that was crazy heavy at times on Monday. The creek went up, and then by now it's down again. Again, with seeing flow into the lakes, it's harder because it's by centimeter in the lake, it's not by liter. but you can also see how it affected the lake. It went up, and now we're opening the valve again, so it's going to start going back down, all within that short period of time from Monday to Thursday.
I'd like to address the reality that, yeah, there are frustrated people out there. I think as local leaders, we have a responsibility to engage those people and ask them if they want to be part of the solution or part of the problem. And I think, I mean, I think even when it's social media, which is a hornet's nest, I think in this situation we're in, as elected officials, we need to get out there more and be challenging those attitudes, and certainly not be leaving it to our staff, who are very very busy trying to get us water, trying to get these people water. So I appreciate Director Inkster you identifying that, because it is true, and I think what I've seen, it's interesting you talk about 2015, because I was on this board in 2015, and there was a tremendous communications effort that we were all engaged in as directors, and we were all putting it out that, and I remember seeing like weekly graphs about, how we were doing in conservation, and all of us challenging people to do better, saying, hey, you did, we're getting better, we can do even better next week. And that's all died down, and I think it's because of fear from those frustrated people biting back at us. And I think we're in an emergency here, and we really need to, as local leaders, step past that and do what's best for the whole community and challenge those people. I just wanted to make that statement. And I think a lot of people up here agree. Director Stanford.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Yes, I agree. There's a lot more we can do. I think for the area that I represent, one of the challenges is most of the residents are not on the system, and they don't have the same restrictions, and they really revel in that and kind of show off a little bit. So I'm hoping that we can all see this as a regional issue, rather than an individual area issue. My question to staff is, with Grey Creek, I noticed that it is an important source, and I also heard that earlier that when there is rain, it becomes turbid and unusable. Was there a point during our recent rainstorm where that became a consideration, or does it take longer for that creek to represent turbidity?
Thank you, Chair. I can see another slide I need to show you now. We have a SCADA, as called. It's a data acquisition program that you can monitor everything. That's where all that graphing comes from. And we were monitoring Grey Creek the entire time, watching the turbidity on that creek, and it didn't exceed the maximum turbidity required for us to shut it off, which is 1.0. And I did see it at some point at 0.11. So that was, fortunately, we were able to keep that on. And as noted, it was 15%. It was quite a large volume of the water for last week. So that's where sometimes we've been concerned, though, and that's why we're talking about and doing work on Grey Creek watershed to get a treatment system in there so that we don't have to shut it off because of the importance of its flows. So to answer your question, we didn't need to shut it off this time.
Director Gabius.
Thank you, Chair. Comment and a question. I would like to thank staff for putting that great graph on the website on the water update. Simple, effective. This is the water that we have. This is what we're working with. And so, like, to see it go down and up, I think that gives people a great idea of what's available and what our situation is. So thank you. And if I may suggest, could we put that on the landing page? That would be great. Instead of that, it's a beautiful picture, but I think that graph would be very impactful on the landing page. And the question, that terrifying statistics of what it was 1,000 liters a day on average, Does that include those leaks, like those 70,000 liters a day, 25,000 liters a day properties, or have those been removed from the equation?
Thank you for the question. I believe that all the leaks were taken out of that, the identified leaks.
And I'd like to echo that about the suggestion about the website too. I mean, I think we have a new, attractive new website, which we've wanted to show off a bit, but now that we're in the midst of summer here and water restrictions, it needs to be right up front, the conservation effort. Director Lee.
Thank you, Chair. Probably not a surprise. I'm on a little bit about Pender Water. I appreciated the leak fix at North Pender, and also I had a neighbor that had a big wedding with lots of other country guests. She was sure thrilled when it come back on. So thanks to your crew. They did a great job, and they stayed there till it was fixed. Now, had a question about clearing the channel. How are you clearing the channel on Harris Lake? I know that you can't access it. It's a walk-in path. So curious about not only how the clearing channel's going, but the potential of lifting the penstock boards or whatever you call them as well.
Thank you for the question. So at Harris Lake, there's a dip where the outlet is, and there's a very old wooden structure that we've only ever cleaned out, like used once before, and it's made out of cedar boards. It's about 2 to 3 feet deep, and the last time we cleaned it out, it was with hip waders and shovels. And then we can release approximately 2 or 3 feet of the lake down into McNeil. So tomorrow we're planning on going up. Staff have already been up this year. We walk in, and then we're going up tomorrow, myself included, to look at getting that completed and the timing of that completion, and also looking at upgrades to that old wooden channel to a better, more modern process of removing that water, which won't be this year, but it will be working towards next year for that. But so for this year, it's shovels and hip waders, and you walk in.
Thank you, Chair. I have 2 more, if I may. Yes, thank you. The long-term outlook for South Pender. I know we can get 2 or 3 feet out of Harris Lake, right, which will go down into McNeil Lake, at least some of it, whatever the ground don't eat up. But what's the long-term outlook if there is no more significant rainfall until, well, we know we can end up into September. We know we can end up into October. Is there any, in other words, are we likely to run out of water? Is there a risk of running out of water in South Pender, even with Harris Lake removed?
Thank you, Chair. The identified gap, I guess, right now that we know of, staff know of, is the ability to access more water out of Harris Lake. That's why we're looking at getting a long-term plan and some sort of piping or something like that. Because Harris Lake, we can we have a license for something like 180,000 cubic meters, and McNeil, I believe, is 360, something like that. So there's quite a bit of water there. It's just the access to it in Harris Lake specifically, and that is the, one of the long-term plans is when McNeil drops, we should be able to feed more water from Harris Lake than we currently are. Again, it's identified that this old wooden structure is inadequate, and if we were to upgrade that, then we would be able to drop Harris Lake considerably to put it into McNeil Lake. Hopefully that answered your question.
Not quite. If we pump all that or let all that water go and it ends up in McNeil, and then we know the watershed aren't contributing anything more. So it's kind of like what we're doing with the Chapman measuring the lake and how fast it goes down. So I guess my question is, how could we, a month from now, how could we tell where we are? Or a month and a half from now, how could we tell how at risk we are? The reason I'm asking this is that the residents aren't overly excited about us needing an existing license or exceeding our license if that's all that the problem is. And if that is all that the problem is, perhaps we should just go to the province and say, how about an emergency until we can get a formal application in? Because this is an emergency and it is climate change and there's no way we could have predicted it. So that's the typical comments I'm getting in Pender when I start talking about this. So could you comment on that one for me?
Thank you. So this is touching on, as I talked about in the presentation, that our current storage capacity in McNeil Lake is quite big. It's in our permit, what's restricting us is the daily consumption from the lake. So what we're doing is looking at expanding that volume so we can pull more water out of the lake per day, but not expanding the storage volume in the lake. So you have a big reservoir with a little pipe kind of thing. We're trying to get the bigger pipe to get more water out of it in our permitting. We've certainly been discussing that. If right now we're not looking at expanding that this year, we're talking about working on that this fall along with the long-term plan. But we continuously monitor the lake level in McNeil, and it's currently down 40 centimeters. We measure it in inches, so I'm converting it. It's 19 inches down, and it's getting to the time for us to release some water from McNeil. We have had McNeil down 5 feet in the past, so there is concern because we're further ahead than normal, but there's still water there, and there's still water up in Harris Lake that we haven't released yet. So right now, we're managing the water consumption in the system with stages because it's exceeding our daily permit, but the water volume storage is still reasonable right now.
Thank you. That's kind of good news. Whoops. Thank you.
Glad to end on good news. Good, yeah. Director McMahon.
Yes, a suggestion that you take some pictures of the folks out with the hip waders and the shovels, because I really don't think a lot of people appreciate how much work goes into maintaining our water system. Previous years, the board got a list of the 20 largest water users on the Sunshine Coast. I would be very interested in seeing this list again to see if some of the people are off it, have moved off that list, because I remember that at least 3 of them were on that list because they had major unrepaired leaks. And so have we seen a decrease in the usage by the largest water users?
I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that question right now. I'd have to get back to you, but we will work on getting you the top 20 leaks.
Thank you, and one more question.
Sorry, that was the top 20 water users by volume.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Director Rowe.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the great report. And I just want to echo the comments made by my colleagues down here. I think this is not just the SCRD responsibility to communicate out to our communities around conservation. I think maybe community associations are an area that we can improve on in the district. I also echo Director Inkster's comments. I think there is a little bit of pushback from the community, and I think we have to push back on people that are throwing their hands in the air. My question, and I'm just clarifying that the 1,000 liter a day quote, that does include the district of Sechelt that isn't on water meters, I would assume. And I don't know if this is information that's easy to pull or not, but I'd be curious to see what the water use is for people that are on meters versus the rest of the community. I'm wondering if there's any sense of that, or if that is making a difference as far as how much people are using. Thank you.
Well, I'll jump in and say the town of Gibson's is quite willing to, we're not only on water meters, but volumetric billing. So I feel like that's, and have been for a number of years. So I think that's actually a good indicator, and we're on stage 2. So I think it's not on stage 2 yet. We're still on stage 1. It's a good indication of what people can, and not hearing a lot of complaints, like people can be using that level of water, which is far below 1,000. I can say that confidently. I've heard different estimates from our staff where it is right now, but I think we should, I've asked for that in recent days about where that per capita water usage is lately. And I think it would be great to share that with the SCRD and show, this is what water usage on the Sunshine Coast could be compared to over 1,000. So we could definitely share that. I don't know about whether showing people who are on meters but aren't on billing within the SCRD would really make a difference. But at least when identifying leaks, it's probably been helpful. But yeah, we're willing to work on getting that Gibson's data to show that comparison. Do you have another? No. Okay. I think we're back to Director Lee.
Thank you, Chair. On a different subject now, on communications, I find that in-person booths in community events are very important to get the word out on things like this. But I also am aware that they're usually on weekends, which when our staff isn't working. But I think those are one of the more effective ways of getting the word out, because it's back and forth, question and answer, and then those people will consider themselves experts and spread it throughout the community. So, for instance, there's Pender Harbor Days coming up, and we have the fire department that's there. Fire departments are extremely concerned about water, and if we were to co-locate some of our personnel with them and answer questions like that, maybe even the fire department would hand it out, but something along that line I think would help a lot, especially in the summertime like this. So that's just a suggestion, it's something to think about, but I just offer it. Thank you.
Director Inkster.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to speak really quickly to what we're having to do with this board and predictability. We know that it's a climate emergency. If we would have read books by heat weather makers, came out 20 to 30 years ago, we knew that this was coming. It's a climate emergency, folks. This is our asteroid. So we need to make some decisions.
Just looking at, trying to sense if those hands are active or not. No, so I think thank you for the water update. And I think Director Inkster ended off that conversation perfectly, so I've got nothing more to say. Oh. Sorry? It's 11? Okay, we're having a break. How long? 5 minutes, 5-minute break. No, we're on to, well, perhaps, yeah, we're on to item 5, which is our Sunshine Coast Arena ice operations water source item, and it's pages 98 to 105, Annex D. We have a manager, I think, available. Yeah, both our general manager is here, and I think we've got a manager available by Zoom as well to answer questions on this. And is there an introduction to the report?
Thank you, Chair. I will turn it over to Manager Van Velzen to introduce the report.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. At the November 15th, 2022 special board meeting, the board resolved in part that staff were to report to a future committee meeting on the viability and financial implications of using alternative water sources for ice operations at the Sunshine Coast Arena. The report brought before you today outlines the current service level for provision of ice, water requirements for ice operations, previously implemented water conservation measures, and options and their associated financial implications for ice operations at the Sunshine Coast Arena during Stage 4 water regulations. 3 options are presented for your consideration: hauling water from an off-site source, continuing to use water from the Chapman system, and amending service levels to not install or operate ice during Stage 4. In addition to these options, staff are recommending exploring the inactive well located at the Sunshine Coast Arena as a potential long-term solution. Staff are seeking the board's direction on which option to pursue for ice operations at the Sunshine Coast Arena. Happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. Director McMahon?
Thank you. There's quite a bit of information in this report about water quality, but it doesn't state clearly, are we required to use water treated to drinking water standards to make ice or not? And if not, like, what is the situation with the well? If we were able to use the well, would we have to treat it to drinking water standards? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. There's no requirement that the water needs to be treated to drinking water standards. It's more around the dissolved solids in the water being adequate for the condenser operation and for making ice.
Thank you. Director Gabius?
Thank you, Chair. This feels like Groundhog Day. It feels like November 15th, we had a water supply update, and then we had to vote on ice at the arena. After Director Inkster's mic drop earlier, I'm having a really hard time supporting installing ice when we're in Stage 4, which is an emergency. I do not support it for very different reasons. Water supply comes first, and also I think it would send the wrong message to residents who are told that every drop counts. And I do think that we should hold ourselves to the same standard as we hold others, like farmers, who cannot water their crops during Stage 4. They do have an amnesty period, but they're under incredible stress when we hit Stage 4, and I think that would be kind of inconsistent with what we ask of them. So I have a hard time supporting installing the ice, but when it comes to if the ice is already installed, I would be open to, like, if the ice is already on and then we go into Stage 4, I would be okay contemplating like an amnesty period, like a period of time where we can look at the weather forecast and see like what's in the future, try to predict as much as possible, because when we look at fiscal responsibility, to have staff time and put money into removing the ice and then installing it again, like we have to be careful with that too. But I'm struggling with this one.
I'm going to go to Director Bax, as he hasn't spoken yet.
My question has to do with the history of this well. Was this well at one point supplying the water to the arena to create ice? Was that the purpose of the well in the first place, or does anyone know?
Good question. I'll look to staff.
That's a little before my time here, but I believe it was supplying water to the arena.
Supplying water to make ice. Is that correct?
That's correct.
That's, yep. No.
Thank you. We have, in another report this afternoon, we will be drilling test wells in West Sechelt. So I was just wondering if this project has an obvious, tie-in to the other project, if we've got the professional well people coming here anyway. Is there an opportunity there?
I mean, it looks like it's not until we're going to have to consider it in our budget, but I'll look to staff.
Chair, thank you for the question. We have had discussions amongst SCRD staff in Waterworks to talk about that, and the timing as it is right now, the chair is correct. This would have to come through budget for approval for the expenditure, but we are communicating as such that if we can add a clause to an existing agreement and then add on to that and add that scope of work, that would save some procurement time, et cetera, for staff. So we are talking to one another so that we have each other in mind as this process continues to unfold. Thank you.
Director Inkster.
Thank you. I'd really like us to look at well and or a system in place to accept outside water going forward rather than looking at the, as we'll call it, municipal water, it's called. And we should talk about that further because they'll come again in November, we know, if there's a water problem, and the people that are concerned about needing ice, and it'll be a lot of people that have figure skaters, hockey players, parents, etc. So we need to look at that. We need to look at some solutions. In terms of the arena itself, and as the chair, just the offside ask of me, the arena was built by private citizens in the 70s, I believe, and the well was most likely installed when there was no water piping up into that area to provide water, I'm assuming. But as I mentioned to the chair, there is a retired staff member that was with the arena when it was with the District of Sechelt, and that may be why the data and information isn't available to the regional district, because as many people know, the arena came to the regional district, I believe, in 2009, 10. So the previous operations, what the district did and where they got the water and where they may have originally got the water, but the private builders of the arena for community use may know. Thanks.
It is interesting, but of course we're dealing with completely different infrastructure and standards now, so it's really, I mean, the important thing is how can we set up this well now. Director Stamford?
There was something in this report I'd like to have seen in the report, is how much did the regional district end up paying in support of extra water being funneled into the Chapman system last fall in order to ensure that our arena was covered? And I recognize that's a bit unfair coming right at the meeting, but it's something I would like to know in future. There was an agreement with Gibson's to provide extra water.
Zero.
Zero.
I'm confident with that answer, yeah. Gibson's didn't supply any water after that point.
Okay, thanks.
Director Bax.
I know that certain organizations approached us last year with an ask for water during our stage 4, and they had a lot of. They seemed very adamant about helping, about trucking in water if they could or not. Now, at this point, I'm looking at there's a $52,000 estimate for the investigation into the use of the well, and I was wondering if user groups or hockey associations or anybody that's involved with that wants to have a second ice surface within the SCRD can be approached, and rather than try to put this onto onto the heads of the taxpayer. Is there any way we can get these people to pitch in and help financially?
My read of the report is that's not so much the obstacle when it comes to kind of trucking water in. It was people definitely wanted to do that, but it's more, and when it comes to the starting up the well, I don't think I mean, it wouldn't be a typical thing that a government would receive donations from people to do something like that. So I'm not sure if it's really a question that can be answered, but
Well, a follow-up.
yeah,
I
I'm
wasn't,
not seeing, yeah.
just a
yeah.
follow-up. I wasn't asking about trucking water in. I just used that as an example of some of the offers that were made last year. But no, I would not support the trucking of the water. It doesn't look like a viable system, but the well looks like a more viable system. And again, echoing what Director Gabias said, that should there be ice in stage 4, we'd have to look very closely at whether or not we're going to continue to supply water for them, for that system. And if there was not ice, and stage 4 was in place, I would definitely not vote to put water into the system at that point. That's my
Okay,
clarity.
are we not looking at it right now? Yeah,
Yeah.
we're actually looking at that right now.
All right,
Yeah,
well,
yeah.
this is
Director McMahon.
Yes, I am looking at the recommendations on page 98, and I am hoping that we can modify them to cover off the question of installing ice in stage 4. So that would mean, if that is the appetite of the board, that would mean an edit to recommendation number 2. So that yes, we need a little wording, because to say that we do not support the installation of ice during stage 4. As worded right now, it doesn't easily fit in the sentence. I'm looking for a rescue here.
Director Inkster.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to take a good look at this 2 months previous, 2 or 3 months previous to when we could. Although the unpredictability of a continuous drought like last year is, who can predict that? But we're going to have to get creative. Talking about rec facilities and the need for water and whether we should provide it, it's a slippery slope. I guess it's slippery when it's cold with water. But anyway, there's 2 pools on the north end of the coast, not on the Gibson's Aquifer, and they both use a lot of water. So when we start talking about rec facilities and water use and which users get water over others, we're really going to have to be creative as to how we look at solutions.
Director Lee.
Thank you, Chair. This is a technical question for our corporate officer. I was curious why Area A was not in the vote here.
Look to our corporate officer. Does appear to be recreation rather than water. I guess Gibson's isn't.
Yes. So just to confirm, I think the voting was based on the participants in the recreation service, not the water service.
But we're talking about supplying water at a cost.
I was just going to add to that, it could be argued either way. So I would be comfortable with Area A participating in that vote if the board is comfortable with that as well.
Makes sense. I see Director McMahon. I support the recommendation. I definitely hear concerns, looking from this far out. But I think it's helpful to look from this far out and kind of make plans for for that this is what we are going to do this year, instead of having delegations crowd our chambers in November or September or any time. I really appreciate that we're looking at this in July, and that's why I support the recommendation. I mean, I also think there are so many. I almost feel it's a little unfair to be really keying in on this one use of water. When you look at all the commercial uses of water too at this time of year that during drought. If this were a commercial arena, presumably there'd be very little water restrictions on it. But because it's our arena, we actually consider shutting it down. So there are so many ways that we could be saving water, like including right now, as we talked about earlier, in order to plan for this usage that really benefits a lot of people in our community and is relied upon as a service from a public service from the SCRD. And did staff want to? Yeah, I saw. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to make sure that the board was clear. The reason that this is in front of you today as a committee is because you don't meet in August, and we start to install ice in mid-September. Thank you.
Director McMahon.
Yes, I concur that this is the time we should be looking at this, and I realize that the playing field is not level for the use of water right across the system. And this is not a huge amount of water, certainly compared to the pools, but as I remember, I believe we closed the Seashell pool in stage 4 last time. So I think if we are going to require other people to restrict their water use, we have to model the behavior that we wish. So my suggestion on the recommendations is 1, as stated, number 2, and that the operations of ICE mid-September through mid-March at the Sunshine Coast Arena continue to utilize the Chapman water system, and then add a new 3, and that the installation of ICE continue to utilize Chapman water system except during stage 4 water restrictions, and then 3, the existing 3 becomes 4. I would be willing to move that motion.
So would that be? I mean, the installation continue. I mean, would be going ahead presumably.
No, the
Under that? No?
installation
Okay.
would not occur if we were in stage 4. But if the ice was already installed, then we would continue to operate the ice surface.
Okay, that's and is that wording been taken down and works? Yeah. Okay. Is there a seconder for that? Seconded by Director Stamford. Discussion of the motion? Director Rowe, did you want to speak to this motion? Or okay, Director Inkster first.
Yeah, thanks. In proposing the motion, the director did indicate, and I did indicate to the chair quietly there, that the Seashell pool is not closed down, it's the hot tub. So just so that when we proceed with these decisions, we have all the facts in front of us. And we know how big the pool is, and we know about the evaporation. They close the hot tub most likely because I'm sure people don't always need that hot water when it's so hot out. So there's rationalization there. But anyway, the large pool is open, and I think that Director Lee could confirm that probably the Pender pool, large pool, is open. So keep those in mind when we go down this road of picking one rec facility over another.
Director Rowe.
Now I'm not confused, but I will speak to the motion, and I would concur that I would want to look in making that decision at all the rec facilities that utilize water. So I can't support the motion as put forward. Can I ask a separate question unrelated to the motion, or do you want me to, you want to deal with this?
Completely unrelated to the motion?
Yeah.
No. I guess we should deal with the motion first, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I concur with Director Rowe. I support the original wording myself. Director Stamford?
I am in support of the new motion, and I don't think it necessarily eliminates then reviewing the other facilities, and that's what we could do at a later date. I just think we have to see this as an emergency that it is, and it isn't just about the arena, but I also am very supportive of trying to find an alternate source for the arena because it is important. Thank you.
Director Lee?
Kind of wish I hadn't spoke up earlier. I would just like to point out that in stage 4, if we truly get into a crisis, we then put in a state of local emergency, and we can manage all indoor facilities at that point. And I think that's when we really need to start thinking about something like not maintaining the ice surface or not using the pool anymore. So I just wanted to point out that there's more than just a stage 4. There is a stage 4A, if you want. Now we're really serious. And I also took note that if this was a commercial operation, they would not be subject to these. And I'm not sure, are we going to start being asked about the pools, about all the other uses of indoor? It's a tough one. And to answer the pool at Pender, it's on its own well, so it's not on municipal water. And the pool is kept full for firefighting purposes, so it's kind of a different animal. Thank you.
I have a lot of hands up on Zoom. I think Director Bax is the only one who hasn't actually spoken to the motion yet, so I'm going to go to Director Bax first.
Yeah, I like the motion as it's been amended. I think it gives a certain amount of clarity, not just to ourselves, but also to the users, to let them know what they can expect when things happen. And when we do go into a state of local emergency, I know we have the ability to restrict commercial uses as well. That's one of the powers that's been given to us through the state of local emergency. And should that happen again, we can talk to big water users that are commercial and restrict their usage.
Director McMahon?
Thank you. I know that we are all hoping very hard that we do not have to go to stage 4 this year, but we can't predict what's going to happen with the weather. So we have to be prepared in case. And I do agree that we should have a policy about our internal, as the SCRD, use of water during stage 4 that is on the books so that we're ready. So I would support that going forward. But if we are serious that this is an emergency, we have to signal that it's an emergency by our own use of water. Thank you.
Director Inkster?
Yeah. It's, I can see where the vote, when you finally call it, is potentially going. I just wanted to, like I said, we need to look for a lot of solutions too as well. And we won't be back till September, sounds like. But I just wanted to ask clarification through you to the corporate officer what the vote is on this. If is it 1-to-1 per area? And then if it goes to board, what's the vote at that point? Just for clarification, if it's weighted in any case. Thank you.
Oh, I don't think it's weighted because it's not it's not financial at this point. That would be further down the road. And then I think with the combination of regional water and implications on regional water and recreation in this, I think what we heard from the corporate officer is everybody can vote. One vote, one person. No, that's not what I heard. No, everybody can vote, that's what I heard. That correct? Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. So I could provide some clarification. Per your procedure bylaw, the voting at committee is with respect to the participants who pay into the service. So in this instance, we have a situation where kind of two services are impacted by this, recreation as well as water. And in that case, I would say at committee, best way forward would be to allow all the directors to vote. When we get to board, we can do it, we can follow that similar process unless there's objection from the board. And in that case, we could also attempt to split the vote because it would still come under administration and operation of the service. So at the board level, when we're voting under that rule, it would be participants of the service and it would be a weighted vote.
Director Stamford.
Thank you, Chair. There was a mention there of speaking to a wider policy about what happens when we get to stage 4 water restrictions, and that we are looking at all our facilities in terms of the impact of water. So how does that get to be actioned? And does that go to the policy committee? Or is there a roundabout way we can address that?
Looking to staff on this.
Thank you for the question. So if the board wishes staff to act, a resolution or motion recommendation should be made in committee. That policy does not need to go forward to the board policy review committee. At any time of the year, we can bring policy forward at any of our standing committees.
Okay, I think those hands are inactive. Okay, before we call the vote, yeah, I think I just want to clarify my own position on this, and that I mean, I think the proposed wording is rational. Overall, it's really good to have this direction set out right now. So I appreciate this coming to the board in July, and you know, I do think that proposed wording regarding stage 4 is rational. I do prefer the original wording, though, by staff. So. Although I think, I will be voting against this, just in hopes, in the faint hopes that we could then put forward the original wording. But it's not. I do think it's reasonable to consider not installing the ice in stage 4 for sure. So we'll vote. All those in favor? All those opposed? So that motion's defeated. Does anyone want to put forward the other wording? Yeah, or anything else? Director Rowe.
I'll move the original recommendations.
Okay. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Director Inkster. Discussion of this motion? Yeah, Director Inkster.
So this motion, if passed, because the previous one didn't, otherwise we're stalemated, leads me to ask, although it is practice for the board to take August off, do we have a plan in case we need to reconvene to deal with one or two of these issues? I mean, one of the reasons why it's in front of us is we need to get ahead of it. And I had hoped we were talking about the arena water previous to today, although there's a lot in the water issue, I get that. But what happens if this passes and we have to come back and talk about it? I think this board is really, I think we're trying to be forward-thinking and really responsible, not only to the water issue, but the conflicting sometimes to our communities. So what do we do? I'm prepared to support this, but we need a plan.
I think what you're referring to actually goes well beyond just this matter, but like
Yeah.
just the consideration of if we hit stage 4 and state of emergency in August, the state of emergency as the board. I took office in November here, and we were in a state of emergency then. Amazingly, we had already started, but I don't know. I don't know what actually happened in August, or if I mean, it happened later, the stage 4, I believe. But what would happen if we hit stage 4 and we're in a state of emergency in August? Would we suddenly be meeting? Yeah, corporate officer.
Thank you for the question. So first of all, I just want to point out a point of procedure that this directive or recommendation is not tagged to go direct to board this afternoon. So if we wish to have this passed and in effect, we need to move that it goes direct to board this afternoon. So that's the first part of it. Otherwise, it doesn't come into effect until mid-December when it's adopted at board. Mid-September, yes. Secondly, with 24 hours notice, the board can call a special board meeting. So we have those tools available.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it goes without saying if we had a state of emergency, we'd be probably expecting special board meetings. And we would definitely, if this motion passes, I think it would definitely need to be a supplemental motion would definitely need to be made to get it to board. Well, I try to look to you guys. I mean, there's a lot of people here around me who can make motions. I can, but Director Stamford.
Can I just be clear that we're going to vote as 2 separate motions here?
One motion on the recommendation on page 98 is what we're looking at right now. And we could make an amendment to it if somebody wants that it go to board this afternoon, or we could do that as a second motion.
I would like to see 2 separate motions. Number 2 voted on, and then number 3 voted on.
Sometimes it's easy to separate. Yeah, that's easy to separate. Yeah, that's easy to separate. So yeah, I'll separate those 2 motions as a board can do upon the or a chair can do upon the request of a board member. So right now we're looking at number 2, that the installation and operations of ICE mid-September through mid-March at the Sunshine Coast Arena continue to utilize the Chapman water system. Director Lee?
Now I'm wondering if I no longer should be voting on this.
It still applies to the water service. We're utilizing Chapman water for the recreation service. In my mind, you're still entitled to vote.
Damn. Okay, thank you.
Okay, nice try, Director Lee. Are we ready to vote? All those in favor of the motion? Or 2, technically, yeah. I mean, I'll catch up on the reports later. Yeah, so that's number 2. All those in favor of the motion? All those opposed? What? 5-4, okay. Thought I saw two votes, but yeah, that motion carries. Okay, yeah, I thought I saw a duplicated vote. Sure, yeah. Keep hands down while I'm trying to figure it out, please. Wait, put your hands up when I ask. All those in favor? Now it's changed. Okay, that's the vote is changed. I mean, I would like people to vote the same way they voted the first time, because that's, I mean, we're just asking for a confirmation of the hands that went up the first time. This isn't a time to change your minds, sorry. All those in favor? No, we see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All those opposed? 4. So the motion carries. Do people want their votes recorded? Yes. Yeah. Now so the number 3 is still on the floor. Do you want to discuss that? Yeah, it had. I mean, that was already brought forward, but then I had to separate them. So, yeah, yeah. Do you want to speak to that?
Sure. This is the solutions piece.
Yeah.
That we need to really seriously consider, and it's explicit and includes only this, but we should be talking about others. So I'll just go with the motion as it existing to move that forward, but we should be looking at other alternatives. Thanks.
Okay. All those in favor of that motion carries. We need an additional motion to at least get the first motion to the meeting because that one's the urgent one, right? Do you want to just do both or? Okay, well,
Sure.
it's up to anybody who Director Inkster.
Yeah, I'll move both to the board.
Okay.
Yeah, I think they're timely.
Seconded by Director Rowe. Discussion. Director McMahon?
It's not clear to me why we need to take this to board this afternoon, because this is our usual practice, and we are not deviating from our normal practice, whereas if we had passed the item about stage 4 restrictions, that would have been a new practice. So I don't see the urgency of moving it to board.
Because staff is requesting board direction on this. That's why the motion, the recommendation came to us. Is there any more discussion? Director Inkster?
Yeah, as I mentioned previously, the board does not tend to meet in August. Staff would like previous direction to the installation of ice, which occurs in September. The other alternative is to not do this, not move it to board, not give staff clear direction, and then wait until September to make a fast decision to stop the bus and from staff from doing what they normally do as part of the regular practice of ice installation.
Calling the vote on the motion. All those in favor? All those opposed? One opposed. Do you want your vote recorded? Sure. That motion carries. Any more on this item? Now we have a succession of, any more on this item? Okay, sorry, like when the hands stay up, like the whole meeting, it makes it really confusing for me. So try to take them down and put them up, and you can't just have it up the whole meeting. Director Stamford.
I did just put it up. I would like to move that the board request staff to bring considerations for all facility actions during a stage 4 water storage or water usage to a future board meeting or future CAL meeting.
Is there a seconder? Seconded by Director Gabius. Okay. So any discussion on this? I'm going to speak to this and say the timing's not good. The reason this came to us in July is we're taking a break in August, and we're going to be right in the midst of it in September. For one, I don't know if that's going to do us a lot of good, and for two, I think our staff work plans are pretty full when it comes to water. So I'm not going to be supporting this motion. I think, but we're going to be having to deal with these items anyway. I mean, if there's a state of emergency, I think there's no question about it. Director Stamford.
Thank you. In response, I'm leaving it as a future date to leave it wide open, understanding that there is a lot of on the staff's table right now. I think it is an important issue to consider in the long term, and recognizing that stage 4 is stage 4. It's not emergency. That's another level. And I think this needs to be dealt with in the longer term as a stage 4 policy.
Director McMahon.
I agree. We need clear policy about what we do with our own facilities and operations when we get to stage 4. In the long run, it could save us trouble if we, heaven forbid, get to stage 4 again. And I'm perfectly fine leaving the timeline on it wide open in understanding that there's a lot of pressure on staff. Thank you.
Yeah, the board is welcome, of course, to make that, provide that direction to staff if the board so chooses. The one thing I would say is we're in the middle of strategic planning. The board is about to develop their priorities and have staff take those away and come back with a potential plan of action to achieve them. This would seem to be adding something outside of that process on the fly that would then be part of the work plan for staff outside of the collaborative strategic planning process. That said, we serve at the pleasure of the board.
Director Inkster.
Thanks. Thank you, Chair. I learned a lesson 15 years ago in local politics that when you get on a subject, don't drop it. And I talked about water then. Nobody wanted to talk about water then. So I've learned a lesson. Now I talk a lot about forest fires and interface, the warning to our community about that, because let's keep talking about it, because no one wanted to talk about water. Look what happened. This is one where we need to put this on the agenda. We need to have, if possible, if staff can fit that in, to come up with some ideas and continuous solutions for looking at water for at least the ice facilities. So that's why we need to support this, because we need to start talking about it as soon as possible, even if it comes when we've started, when the ice is in and we've started the process of the use of those facilities. At least this discussion is finally on the table. I had hoped that the ice facility discussion and how we would provide water for it came back to the board in December, right away after that user group left, because we knew it was going to come again. This is like, we're going to run out of water every summer. There could be a forest fire. The ice arena needs water. So I have to support this.
Director Bax.
I was wondering if we could ask staff to, once stage 4 is declared.
On the motion,
Yes.
please. Yeah,
Yes.
just making sure this is still on the motion. Yeah,
Yes.
not an additional motion.
No. Speaking to the motion brought forward by our director here, which was that staff consider our internal water uses during stage 4 and bring us forward a report as to how we can limit our water usage. I would put forward that the timeline would be that they don't worry about it until we reach stage 4, at which point that's all hands on deck. Is it not? Does that make sense?
We're debating a motion anyway, so I don't have an answer for that. Director Lee.
I'm trying to fit this into the big picture in my mind here, and I know we have projects talking about creating wells so that we can water our playing fields. Somehow it seems to me this is part of the bigger discussion on water, unless we're just talking about pre-planning stage 4 actions, which, are we going to cover all eventualities in this policy? It's going to be a pretty big one. So anyways, I don't know if I could get any clarity from it. Is it that we are just concerned about the one issue, and we're trying to update a policy to cover that issue? Is that what we're up to here? Or are we trying to look at the water as a big picture and see everything we can do to help us get through the water crisis, which is a much bigger discussion in my mind, and I think we're having it, and we're going to have it more. That's just my thoughts. Thank you.
Director McMahon.
As regards where this fits into strategic planning and so forth, this will not come back to us, to the board, until September. So at that time, if we find that we've taken a different direction through strategic planning, we could revisit this and vote it down. But I think in the meantime, I would like to get it on the books that we're trying to get prepared in case we should end up in stage 4 again. Thank you.
Okay, looking at the vote for the motion now. All those in favor of the motion? All those opposed? The motion carries. Now are we ready to move on to all these reports we have? Let's look at the time too. It is noon now. Yeah, I'm actually concerned about getting through the rest of this agenda. We have well, that's what I'm talking about. Yeah, we have an in-camera item, a couple items on in-camera, and a number of reports here. A lot of very substantive reports that we could be asking a lot of questions on. So I kind of want to just test out the will of the board here. Do we want to basically accept these reports as information and or put them forward to a future meeting for more time for questions? I'm not seeing any strong. Yeah, okay, Director McMahon.
Yes, I do have questions, and I don't want to just skip over these substantive reports, particularly solid waste. But I understand that we have time constraints today. September's not going to be a whole lot better, sadly.
Yeah.
So I'm personally, my questions are mostly around solid waste. I could let the rest of them slide. I don't know how other people feel.
Director Inkster?
Could I make a motion to move 7, 8, 9, and 10 to September, if possible, and have that seconded? Maybe we'll just keep 6 on the agenda.
Yeah, or we could even just reorder the agenda right now and go in camera and come out of in camera, and if we have time, I don't think we're going to have time, but yeah. Okay, I didn't see a seconder for that, but I appreciate that suggestion, and we might do that later. Let's go to 6 right now, and then we're going to go in camera, which is helpful because solid waste is here too. So there's the report's been presented, very, very thorough report. Yeah, I was really impressed by the level of data in this report. I think there's more data being collected and presented really well. So are there any questions? I'll look to Director McMahon.
Thank you. I have several. Great graph on top of page 109. And I guess my question that comes out of this is that aspirational goal of a diversion rate of 70% achievable?
Looking to step.
Thank you for the question, and through the chair. It's a hard question because I look at a lot of other regional districts that also have similar diversion targets, and in some cases they are higher, and a lot of them are struggling to meet their targets because you can pick off the low-hanging fruit like organics bans, but to actually kind of drill down and really start pulling out some difficult to recycle materials, it requires a lot of time, investment, and resources to do so. So I'd say it is possible, but you're looking at additional initiatives that are likely required to get to that target, and certainly more to reach a higher target, which may or may not be in the updated solid waste management plan.
Thank you. And I'm going to Director Gabius now.
Thank you, Chair. Has the SCRD ever had a pilot project or that would see like bins for like commercial styrofoam and soft plastics at the landfill? Because my partner is in the construction industry, and that's a lot of the waste that they have, and they can't send it to Salish, and it just ends up in the landfill. So has this ever been in place?
Thank you for the question, and through the chair. No, it hasn't, and some of those items in particular on the commercial side are actually very difficult, if not impossible, to recycle, and in many cases they are landfilled. So I know what the province is working on right now as part of their 5-year action plan on EPR is a deep dive into the commercial sector and whether there are opportunities for provincial legislation around an EPR program for commercial recycling, similar to what we have on the residential side. So I think that is probably the best avenue to improve recycling in the commercial sector, is to help support and push the province along in that area.
Thank you. Director Bax?
Yeah, my question was mostly answered by that. The commercial sector seems to be one of the most problematic parts of this study. On page 115, it shows that the majority of the stuff going into the landfill, it seems to be commercial. I know there's other jurisdictions that treat commercial waste differently, and I imagine we've looked at them. There's a lot of reuse going on. There's legislation going on in cities like Victoria that are demanding that construction materials be reused as much as possible. I was wondering if we're going to try. I know we're waiting on the province to try to implement anything, but if there's anything that we can implement here ahead of time, that would be wonderful. Is there anything that we're working on in-house?
Thank you for the question, and through the chair. Yeah, so something like a deconstruction bylaw, which we've seen in a number of municipalities, is certainly something that's on the radar for our solid waste management plan update, which is happening right now. So that is something that will be explored further and especially discussed with our member municipalities who would also need to implement a similar bylaw on their end.
Director Lee?
Yes, thank you, Chair. The question earlier on page 109 on the diversion rate, Area A and Area F are very heavy on part-time residents. Are they calculated in that, or I know it's a tough question, but just curious how we decide what the per capita is.
Thank you for the question, and through the chair. Yeah, the population is based on Statistics Canada, so we rely on their data, and whether or not they capture part-time versus full-time residents, I'm not entirely sure what their metrics are.
Thank you. Is Canada the one that we use for permanent residents in our financial plan? Does anybody know that one? Because we don't count the part-timers then. We only count where they declare their primary residence. Okay, it's okay, doesn't matter. Thank you. I'll ask other places.
I'll go to Director Inkster as he hasn't
Just a question on this and our move to divert up to 70%. Do we know if, and I'll just use this as an example, not necessarily as a flag wave, is Seashelt the only one that picks up regular garbage every 2 weeks with the smaller can?
Thank you for the question, and through the chair, no, SCRD has garbage pickup, as well as, I believe, Town of Gibson's as well as also biweekly pickup. So yeah, not the only one. In fact, I think that's the norm on the coast, is that biweekly pickup model.
Director McMahon.
Thank you. And just last word on the commercial sector. Basically, looking at the figures here, the residential taxpayers are subsidizing the commercial disposal, and that to me is kind of a problem. At the top of page 116, there is a graph of top diverted materials from the landfill. The graph is by tonnage, but our landfill capacity is by volume. So I'm not sure that this graph is kind of capturing it, because the metal is heavy, and so it makes it look like we're diverting a lot, but like mattresses, which are light, take up a lot of room in the landfill. So is the graph perhaps a little misleading?
Thank you for the question, and through the chair. To some extent, it's very hard to equate volume to a tonnage, because each material is going to have a different density. It would likely require a substantial amount of investigation to actually come up with a metric like that. We've been able to do it on a small scale with simple items, such as with the dock foam and the ocean plastics depot that we opened, but it would be quite hard to equate this into an airspace. So in a sense, what's important here is trying to look at the overall trend, and you'd want to see more diversion, and that's going to give you more airspace. But as to how much airspace you're going to be getting out of it, it's quite hard to put a number on that.
Director Gabius.
Thank you, Chair. At a recent PTAC meeting, it was flagged that BC Ferries does bring its waste. I don't know if it's all their waste all the time, or 50-50, but it does bring waste to the Seashelt landfill. Do we have information about that, and do we know if they divert, if they do the recycling part, or if it's just all ending up in the landfill?
Thank you for the question, and through the chair. Yeah, so it is my understanding that BC Ferries brings their Langdale bins to Seashelt landfill, being on the coast. We don't have any information on what's in those bins, or what is being done on site. The SCRD doesn't really get involved in on-site enforcement, and so we don't know what most commercial operations are doing in terms of diversion at their facilities or at their sites.
Okay, thank you for that answer. And that concludes the questions, it appears, for this item. And I've held off on getting a motion to receive all the reports, because I wasn't sure everything would make it stay on the agenda. Do directors have questions on some of these other items that we should perhaps forward to future meetings? Or, I mean, I can kind of see some of them we can just receive the reports probably. Is there anything for these final reports, 7 to 10, that we need more time on? Seeing none, could I entertain a motion that we receive all reports in the agenda? Director Inkster, seconded Director Gabius. All those in favor? The motion carries. So we're done with 7 to 10 too, just to be clear. Okay. Oh, one question, Director Stamford?
It's not a question, it's just a comment. Moving through these, it doesn't indicate the appreciation of the level of work that's gone into this. I think it's sometimes disheartening for staff to put all this work in and us not respond, but I do want to be able to respond later on. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for mentioning that, because they are, I mean, one reason that I think we can make this motion is they're very thorough reports. So there's so much information in there that informs me and my position and helps us all to answer questions throughout the entire year. So now we're looking at going to in-camera. And that in-camera motion is that we are excluding attendance from the meeting in accordance to sections 91G and K of the Community Charter, which are regarding litigation and negotiations. Moved by Director Inkster, seconded by Director Gabius. All those in favor? Okay, we're going into in-camera. Okay, we are back to our Committee of the Whole agenda, July 27th, 2023. And I think all we have is a motion to adjourn. Director Inkster. Director Gabia seconds. All those in favor? The motion is carried. I don't think anyone is out there. Yeah, it doesn't look like it. I think we've even lost a person who must